Dit is de Shabir Show met Shabir Burhani.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brothers and sisters, may the peace and blessings of Allah Almighty be upon all of you. The subject matter of today in our live stream is what's really happening in Afghanistan right now. The counter narrative, the other side of the story. We will today look into the reality surrounding the events in Afghanistan. Just like yesterday, we will show the other side, the truth, so that people are not misled by the propaganda which is broadcasted from the mainstream media. So we will start with this lecture of Khalid Yassin about the Taliban in Afghanistan. Is from some years ago, 2012. It's on the YouTube channel of One Islam Productions, but it still holds true for what's happening today, because he explains the origins of the Taliban. How did this Islamic movement start? When you understand the history and the background, then you will understand today's events and what the future will hold more clearly. So let's start, inshallah. Bismillah.
Our brothers, the Taliban, we won't comment on them from a political point of view, because that's not the nature of our talk today. But let us comment on them for an accomplishment that they and only they were able to do in the modern world. In the modern world, between America, Great Britain, China, Russia, Germany, France, Japan, Italy. Between the major countries in the world, the drug trafficking is a business and an industry of over $78 billion a year. $78 billion a year. Can you imagine what kind of industry it is?
That's a lot of money.
And can you imagine the tragedy, the disparagement, the disease that drugs have brought in the modern world as a result of this industry?
Yes, I can imagine.
All of these sophisticated countries have found no solution for the drug problem. In fact, they have chosen to benefit, profit, and regulate the drug traffic because they are unable to stop it. Yet, consider this. The Taliban in Afghanistan became an official government after the defeat of the Russians.
Soviet Union.
And at that time, Afghanistan was the major theater, corridor in the world.
It still is. Today it's also
61% of all of the heroin of the world was produced between Afghanistan.
When the US-led attack happened after 9/11 in 2001, October, in the last 20 years, Afghanistan has become, unfortunately, again, the biggest producer of drugs because they profit from it. But now, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, of the Taliban, will ban it again, just like they did when they started in the 90s.
Afghanistan and China. And the Russian gangsters, criminals, were the ones that controlled this industry.
Communists.
Part of the war of Afghanistan had to do with drugs. Not oil, not gas, but drugs.
Today too.
When the government of Russia was defeated and pushed out of Afghanistan, Afghanistan become immersed in civil war. We know that, isn't it?
Fitna.
Civil war. That civil war had two sides.
Today they want to cause again a civil war. You see the so-called resistance in Panjshir, but they will soon be crushed because first the Taliban wanted to solve the question peacefully. They talked with the elders from Panjshir. But if Amrullah Saleh and Ahmad Massoud don't listen, then soon within few days it will be liberated, inshallah.
The atheists, the socialists, the communists among the Afghanis, and the Muslims who wanted to follow the Quran and the Sunnah. The North, the Northern Alliance, who themselves were related to the Russian gangsters, who were mostly Muslims who have adopted socialism.
The Northern Alliance are criminals. They are warmongers, and they are also child rapists. You know, the Bachabazi, like the pedophile acts, it started there, you know, and the Taliban are against that, just like they are against drugs and other haram things.
Atheism, who themselves were criminals, they wanted to continue the enterprise of drugs after the Russians moved out. They wanted to continue the industry of prostitution, gambling, all of this here.
They wanted today too. Nowadays.
And the Muslims said no.
We say no.
We won't continue that. We want to establish Islam.
Indeed.
And they began to have wars between them.
Vol spanning de winkel in, relax de winkel uit. Met schermreparatie van Mediamarkt.
If you run ads on Facebook for your dropshipping business, you're probably wasting about 50% of your ad budget.
One of the groups that were insisting upon the Quran and the Sunnah were called the students.
Taliban.
In the Arabic language, the students is Talib or Taliban. And on one occasion, those atheists, socialists, communists, Afghanis, those criminal Afghanis, they entered some villages and they raped the women.
Astaghfirullah.
And some of those women escaped. And they ran to seek protection with those students. And those students, they sought to get a fatwa from their shuyukh. What should we do about these Muslims who did this act?
Punish them.
Those scholars said they should be punished. They are criminals, and the hukum is to find them and kill them as criminals.
Fujar and Fusaq.
Those students then took their weapons and gathered themselves together as a group and called themselves the Taliban.
Under the leadership of Mullah Omar.
To seek the honor of those women who were raped. And they went from village to village, town to town, until in a 2-year period of time, they conquered all of Afghanistan.
Allahu Akbar.
2 years. They conquered all of Afghanistan.
Wow, this time it was even more amazing. In 11 days, they conquered almost all of Afghanistan. A little more than a week ago, last Sunday. Not this Sunday, but the other Sunday, they even liberated Kabul. Subhanallah, in 11 days, that could only happen with the help of Allah, the believers, and the angels.
Except only 19%. 80% of Afghanistan they conquered in 2 years.
Wow, this is even more special. In the last few weeks, they conquered like 95% of Afghanistan. Maybe even 99%, because Panjshir is just a little valley. It's not even 1% of Afghanistan. And that will also be liberated, freed within coming days or weeks, inshallah. Maybe even 48 hours.
Who were they? They did not have sophistication. They were walking, riding donkeys and horses, fighting on foot, fighting for the honor of their women, for the honor of their country, for the honor of Islam.
Izzah.
And in 2 years' time, they subdued the entire country. Of course, they were not sophisticated in their knowledge. They did not have universities. They did not have institutions. Even in most of Afghanistan, there was not a standing hospital.
Subhanallah.
But they established what they called
the Islamic
Emirate of Afghanistan. The only standing Islamic emirate in the world at that time. Yes, they were ragtag. They were not sophisticated. But they had honor and love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inside their hearts. And we don't know, as Muslims, we don't know any connection with the Taliban to September the 11th. So let's be clear about that.
True.
We don't know, we don't have any evidence or any proof that they had any connection to that, except that they would not give up their brother, Osama bin Laden. We don't make any comments about what happened because we don't know. But we don't indict people without evidence. And we certainly don't indict a country because someone is living there whom someone else feels is indicted.
That's fair. Fair enough.
But let me get back to the issue. Afghanistan came under the rule of the Taliban, and they were faced with a challenge. What are they going to do with the drug industry which they found in Afghanistan? The Taliban made a decision. From a point of honor, from a point of morality, a point of dignity and decency, from a point of Sharia, they could not support and allow drug trafficking to exist in Afghanistan. So what did they do? They began to punish those who held drugs, those who sold drugs, and they began to imprison those that used drugs. Then they gave an option to the farmers who were the growers of poppies in Afghanistan, the major crops for drugs, isn't it? They told them, we will give you the land where you are growing the poppies. You take the land, but you must grow another crop. You must grow a different crop. But if you don't grow another crop, then we will bury you on that land.
Wow.
That's the only option they gave them. In a year and a half after the fatwa came about this issue, a year and a half, the drug trafficking and the growing of drugs and the manufacturing of drugs in Afghanistan was 3%.
SubhanAllah.
How did an unsophisticated group of students, without government, without sophisticated institutions, how did they do this? How did they eliminate an industry which represented 61% of the source of drugs in the entire world? How did they do that?
With the help of
They
Allah.
did it from their iman. They did it because they were affected by the Quran. They did it because they were affected by the behavior of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
And this is why I say, as an example, that Islam and only Islam has the properties by which to affect the human being's consciousness.
Precisely.
To design and regulate his morals, and even to regulate governments, so that even governments themselves are forced to adhere to rules of decency and dignity.
Indeed, that's the way it is. Respect.
Kijk, dit is iets meer dan 10.000.
MashaAllah. So, let's watch now to a recent opinion about what happened the last few days. It's from Russell Brand. He's a very famous vlogger, YouTuber, celebrity, how you call it, from England. So let's listen to what he has to say.
A lot of news about Afghanistan at the moment is focusing on whether or not the United States should have withdrawn and whether the withdrawal under Biden has been botched. Evidently, it has been botched. That's why we're witnessing scenes of horror where you see the normally orderly boarding of a plane reduced to a hysterical farrago as a civilization apparently collapses. But I think a more important question is, why were the United States of America in Afghanistan in the first place? If you no longer believe the evidently bogus narratives that countries like America, UK, any colonial power go to war in order to, you know, for some humanitarian imperative in order to help people. We're helping people through war. No one believes that anymore, even if I was making these videos for children, and in a way I am, because I hope children watch them, but I'm also making them for you, my peers, the people that are the same as me, that see the world the same as me, that see through the illusions and the deception and are trying to understand what's really happening within the limitations, within the control that's placed on information and within the censorship that ordinarily is practiced on massive platforms. But one thing that's difficult to ignore in Afghanistan now, when confronted with this humanitarian disaster, when confronted with the reality of US involvement in a foreign territory, when relieved of the idea that countries like, as I say, America, UK, imperial powers, whichever one, I've not got a side, you know, although I have got inbred biases from being an English person, whatever the public narrative is, the reason is always money and profit. Remember, if something doesn't make sense to you, just have a look at that situation and think, well, who benefits from this situation?
I went to Afghanistan almost 20 years ago with clear goals. Get those who attacked us on September 11th, 2001, and make sure al-Qaeda could not use Afghanistan as a base from which to attack us again. We did that.
Before we get into the numbers and who hugely benefited from Afghanistan, let's look at the human reality. 4,400 American soldiers died, 6,300 American GIs and contractors. A reputed $1 trillion of American money has been wasted, a number that none of us can even calculate or hold in our minds unless we're mathematicians or can see a series of zeros reaching off into an imagined horizon. And Britain alone has wasted 37 billion. That's not to talk of the number of Afghan people, because for stuff I've read, them numbers ain't even recorded. Of course, the reasons we're told for these wars is, oh, you know, terrorism, their culture is barbaric, they dress different, they have different ideas around gender, equality, sexuality, nonsense, ideology. Any bit of cultural and antipathy that can be conjured up through these events is always welcome, always used to stoke the flames. But here are some numbers that might interest you and might tell a story if you use the simple, what do I want to say, paradigm or equation that I mentioned earlier. If you or I look at Afghanistan and see a disaster where people are needlessly losing their lives, where a country is being decimated and is in decline and disintegration, public immolation, disaster and emergency, then who could see it as beneficial? Well, let's have a look at the numbers. Advocacy group Public Citizen says entrenching US forces in Afghanistan was the military-industrial complex's business plan for 20 plus years. Hawks and defence contractors co-opted the needs of the Afghan people in order to line their own pockets. A long entrenched war of 20 years, for most people, whether you're a patriotic supporter of the troops or you're a pacifist who's anti-war, you know, that's not a good setup. That's not a good scenario when you look at the recent military history, say just 20th century wars, those, you know, Vietnam onwards conflicts. Anything other than a short, sharp Desert Storm, Falkland-style, jingoistic, bellicose, you know, public image, home front boosting victory has to be seen as a disaster. But to some people, those things are those events, those tragedies, those wastes of human life, those distractions from who we really are, this pursuit of mad ideals for mad ends is hugely beneficial. Here are the profits of the 5 biggest defence contractors over the past 20 years, the period during which the United States of America have been in Afghanistan. And remember, kind of began didn't it, around 2001. And if you want a sort of a deeper and sort of colourful and rather baroque and delightful history of various conflicts in Afghanistan, you might want to watch Bitter Lake, Adam Curtis's amazing series of documentaries on the subject, talking about the Russian conflict in the same territory and their comparable colonial imperatives, even under what some people would call state capitalism, but was sort of commonly known as state communism. So, here are the return stocks of the 5 biggest defence contractors over the past 20 years. Lockheed Martin made a 1,236% return. So for 100 million investment, you know, a billion. I'm not very good at maths, but 1,236% seems like that seems good business being done over at Lockheed Martin. And remember, if your business has as its primary client the government of a country, influencing that government's policy would be essential. If, for example, America was run according to the will of most people, wherever you are, on the left or the right or in the middle or somewhere high pie in the sky, if you were in government, wouldn't you, broadly speaking, say, I don't want the sons and daughters of America coming home in zipped up bags. I don't want to be getting involved in foreign conflicts unless there's a very, very good reason. And I certainly, here's one rule we could put in place to ensure no skullduggery. No private enterprise is allowed to profit from this endeavour. Why would you not put that as a bill through Congress? Why would you not put that through the Senate or Parliament or wherever? I'll tell you why. Because those are the principles under which your and my and all countries are run. If you try to undermine those principles, if you even speak publicly about those kind of ideas, you are at risk, and certainly those ideas won't be countenanced, won't be discussed. Again, to cite Chomsky, who I know a lot of you dudes don't like, he say, anything that ain't on the table being discussed by either, because let's face it, there's only 2 political parties, you ain't got no vote on that. That's tyranny. So however much you hate communism, one-statism, just think about what is it you're really voting about and why are those issues so heavily and emotionally charged? Could it be to distract you from the many things you're never able to discuss, never able to vote on, things that lead to the appalling scenes of human indignity and destruction that you've witnessed over the last week, accompanied, of course, necessarily by the philanthropic campaign, can you support these lives in Afghanistan? I'll tell you who should be supporting it, the people that have been profiting from it from 20 years. Instead of you putting your hand in your pocket and forking out $1 or £1 or whatever it is you got that you can barely afford, how about Lockheed Martin with their 1,200% pay for the humanitarian disaster? How about Northrop Grumman pay out of the 1,196% return that they've seen? Or Boeing out of the 975% return that they've seen? Boeing, don't they? Well, no, they make all the airplanes for British Airways, don't they? When you watch those adverts on the telly, the other side of them is, oh, da, da, da. You try getting on an aeroplane in Heathrow or Colorado or New York or LA in the way that they're getting on them in Afghanistan at the moment. Remember, these things are on one tiny rock in limitless space. You can't portion up reality in that way. You can't say, here our business is all red carpets, nice hairdos and little starters on a nice plate. You can see which class I travel in. You know, like, and then over here people are charging a bleeding airport. There's got to be some integrity is the word I'm looking for. Integrity. All elements of reality interwoven and interconnected. Referring to these numbers in The Intercept, John Schwartz said, these numbers suggest that it's incorrect to conclude that the Taliban's immediate takeover of Afghanistan upon the US's departure means that the Afghanistan war was a failure. On the contrary, from the perspective of some of the most powerful people in the US, it may have been an extraordinary success. Notably, the boards of directors of all 5 defence contractors include retired top-level military officers. You know this already, you know how it operates, it's not a coincidence. Jack Merkinson in Discourse said, we did not go into Afghanistan to support its people, and we did not stay in Afghanistan to support its people. It is astonishing, given what we know about the monsters that the US has propped up time and time again around the world, that the myth persists that we do anything out of love for human rights. We went in and we stayed in for the same reason. The American empire is a force that must remain in perpetual motion. As an English person, and I respect your country and I respect you as people, I ain't critiquing your nation from outside of it. Do you think British Empire was any better? Do you think any empire is any better? This is the nature of the economic and ideological systems that have been allowed to dominate our culture for too long.
Our only vital national interest in Afghanistan remains today what it has always been: preventing a terrorist attack on America's homeland.
General Dynamics, another massive company, 625% return over the last 20 years. It's been a very profitable 20 years in Afghanistan for them. Raytheon, 331% return. You know, Raytheon, by the way, that's that dude who's like high up, isn't he? Isn't he the defense minister? We've got this guy. He's very unbiased on whether or not to have wars. Good, because we need him. What was your last job? Made weapons and that. Sold weapons, just selling weapons really. Just mostly in the selling weapons industry. Backgrounds in selling weapons primarily. Should we have wars? Well, I don't know. Will the wars require, for example, weapons? Yeah, I suppose so. We'd have to kill people with them. Yeah, do a war then. Do a war. It's just, I don't know, for some reason, I'm sensing it using my crystal ball and my crystal bazooka. I'm sensing a war would be a good thing. But what about the terrible scenes at the airport? Yeah, I tend not to think about that too much. Some mug can pay for that on the telephone. You can fork out for that. When it comes to paying for the humanitarian disaster, woo, would you like to get involved? It's all of our responsibility. When it comes to extracting the profit, you've just heard the 5 names: Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, General Dynamics, Raytheon. Those are the people that are profiting. Those are the people that should pay. Seems simple, doesn't it? So why can something so simple not happen? Because all of your systems, your entire reality, you are some pipsqueak ash just blowing around on the breeze of the mighty power of the jet engines of Boeing, Raytheon. They organise your reality. They organise your wars. They create your human rights disasters, but you pick up the tab. Let me know what you thought of this video in the description. Comment. Tell me what else to watch so as I can learn more. Subscribe to my channel and sign up to my mailing list at russellbrand.com so I can communicate with you directly if I ever need to. If you want to see me live, you can. And if you want to hear me have deep conversations on these subjects, go over to Luminary that you can get from Apple and sign up for my podcast Under the Skin and meditate with my other podcast on the same network, Above the Noise. If you want to watch a free football podcast for some reason, just to distract you, to leap into the mindless glory of something else, then have a look at Football Is Nice. There's also a channel for that. If you want to see more videos like this, have a look at this one. If you want to see videos that are maybe a bit more spiritual on my side channel Awakening, have a look at this one. Whatever it is you do, don't let this situation drive you crazy and don't believe the lies. Stay present. They caused this war. They should pay for it. Remember the names.
It was mainly the military-industrial complex, the media, and some Zionist lobbyists who profited from the war in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other Muslim countries. They don't care about people being killed on the two sides, you know. They only care about the money. So if you follow the money, then you will know who were the ones who caused these wars and who were behind 9/11 and those terror attacks.
It's great that the world is concerned about the human rights of people in Afghanistan, but where have you been? Literally, where have you been for the last 20 years? The war on terror has gone on longer than World War I and World War II put together. It has touched 85 countries. It has led to the death of civil liberties within the countries that launched it. This was a war of choice. When the United States announced that they wanted Osama bin Laden, the government in Afghanistan were quite clear. They were willing to provide him to be judged in a court of law. The United States were not even happy for him to go to The Hague. They wanted military action. Did that have something to do with the fact that within George Bush's administration, there were 6 senior executives at Lockheed Martin, a company which has benefited massively from the war on terror? This war, which has lasted 2 decades, has entailed the costs of about $6.4 trillion. The Afghan war has cost not only almost 250,000 lives, but it cost the US government $2.26 trillion. The US spent trillions, and where did it go? It went into the bank accounts of some of the most wealthiest people in the world.
Some people call you the elite. I call you my base.
It went to Dick Cheney's Halliburton. It went to Eric Prince, formerly of Blackwater.
Would you be profiting from the war?
Well, we're not there now, but any vendor that solves that solution, that's capitalism. That's what it's about.
Blackwater killed many civilians in Iraq and were captured on camera doing so. It went into Veritas Capital, the second largest military contractor in Iraq in Afghanistan. It owns DynCorp. DynCorp employees were hiring child prostitutes within Afghanistan. It went to Lockheed Martin, who within days of the announcement of the Afghan war got one of the largest no-bid contracts in US history. This war, as it always is, was a transfer of wealth upwards. Robin Hood in reverse. That money could have been better spent housing people, giving people their own human rights here. Do not allow the war industry to lead you to believe otherwise.
The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite.
The Afghan war logs, for which Julian Assange seems to be paying the price with his life today in a cold cell, revealed torture, death squads, rendition, individual killings, group killings.
This is the whole context, with some exceptions, of the Afghan war.
These are some of the unknowns that Donald Rumsfeld spoke about. Another person who has done much to reveal them is Daniel Hale, who showed that 90% of victims of the US drone program were actually innocent bystanders. Daniel Hale has paid the price and will be sent to jail on the charge of espionage. So at a time where we have seen the main patriarchs of the war on terror, George Bush and Tony Blair, relentlessly rehabilitated and in fact oracleized, we simultaneously see those who have revealed the war crimes of these war criminals demonized, imprisoned and ignored completely. This is how they monsterize the humans and humanize the monsters. Overall, the war on terror is believed to have caused 37 million refugees. When we look at the war on terror as a force of displacement across the world, the very same governments that are involved in these NATO campaigns are also preventing people seeking asylum in their countries.
We need to ensure that we are protected from a large-scale influx that can have detrimental effects.
35,000 people and over have died trying to get into Europe over the last 30 years. The Afghans that have died following their displacement and attempt to enter the EU include Reza Ibrahimi, a 15-year-old child who died in the camp in Lesbos on the 25th of August 2019. Amin Allah and Iftikhar, 18-year-old boys who both died under a freight train trying to get into Europe on the 7th of June 2019. Or what about Ali Reza, the 18-year-old who took his own life in Geneva in a shelter for unaccompanied minors on the 27th of March 2019.
What a tragedy.
These governments are making it as difficult as physically possible for people from countries like Afghanistan to reach a safe haven. Contrary to this entirely manufactured but seemingly widespread and popular view that actually you help people by invading and bombing them. The truth is, you help people by not interfering in their affairs, by learning from...
Just like George Orwell said in his book 1984, euphemistically, war is peace.
History and providing safe passage to asylum. You help...
Walaikum salam, superhelden, welkom allemaal. Vandaag is het in het Engels, zodat we de international community kunnen bereiken. Maar het is reuze interessant, jullie zullen er veel van leren. Zowel de Engelse taal als wat er daadwerkelijk gaande is in de wereld. Dus let op en concentreer en focus.
People by not haranguing those who rescue people in the sea struggling for life.
The extraordinary morning we're having on the water, Kate. Just take a look.
Kijk, ik wil het niveau van de Shabir Show verhogen, snap je? Afgelopen jaar hadden we over alles en nog wat gehad, soms ook onzin en zo. Maar laten we nu echt over kwalitatief hoogwaardige, belangrijke, actuele, kennisrijke dingen hebben, zodat iedereen iets van kan leren, snap je? Want die tijd en energie die we hier samen spenderen, we moeten hasanat verdienen en tegelijkertijd moeten we de ogen van mensen openen en gewoon de volledige waarheid tot de man brengen als het ware, begrijp je? Dan leren we zowel zelf iets als we onderwijzen ook anderen en daar heeft dan iedereen gewoon baat bij.
How many of you? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 men who are on the dinghy. Where are you from?
You help people by not sending journalists to interrogate them in their most desperate moments within the sea. You help people by not demonizing them on the front of newspapers owned by unaccountable offshore capital like Rupert Murdoch. You have no benefit in believing in their lies of vertical solidarity and horizontal hatred. You have more in common with the people fleeing the bombs paid for by you than you do with the people dropping the bombs paid for by you. When you look at the history of Afghanistan and the way in which it is intertwined with the history of this country, you are talking about a place which has been the subject of British war 4 times in the last 2 centuries. Starting in 1839, when General Keane marched into Kabul with 10,000 troops, the British did not achieve their objectives and were forced to leave in a humiliating march of doom. In fact, 100 years ago, in 1919, it was the first country in the world to drop bombs on Afghanistan. 332 bombs in 1 single day. Britain should never have been there, and it should never go back ever again.
Why do you feel it so personally, Mr. Wallace?
Because I'm a soldier. Because it's sad, and the West has done what it's done. And we have to do our very best, Nick, to get people out and stand by our obligations. And 20 years of sacrifice is what it is.
Ben Wallace. He was the overseas director of Kinetic, an arms company which benefited handsomely from the occupation of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is not the property of the United States and the UK. It is time that people in the US and Britain understood that they have no right to dictate who can or can't be the government of any other country. This idea of liberation through occupation exists only in the imagination of MOD-influenced journalists. Maybe now is not the time for the deep contemplative think pieces in somber tones from the people that marched us into this. Now is the time in which those of us who campaigned year after year against these industrial massacres to be clearly understood to have been vindicated, even within your own tortured logic in the service of power, you have failed. Now is the time for humility and accountability on the part of the warmongers and hope for the rest of us.
Billions of pounds have been spent. Hundreds of British soldiers have died. Hundreds of soldiers from other coalition forces have died. And thousands upon thousands of Afghan civilians and soldiers have also died. For what? For whom? For what purpose in the long run?
Good riddance to the war on terror. 20 years of pain, suffering, and misery which could have been avoided. This time of threat inflation and overstated danger has to come to an end. You have 1 in 16 million chance of being anywhere near an act of political violence in this country. Why is it that all of this money has gone into fighting something that your chances of dying in are infinitesimal? Far more people are dying because of climate change and pollution than they are because of terrorism. It is a well-documented fact that the United States military is a bigger polluter than 140 countries and spends more than the next 7 countries put together on its military budget. Therefore, the US military is a bigger threat to you and to Afghans than the Taliban could ever be. Our future cannot be defined by warfare and enemies. We have to find a way in which humanity can come together to survive the major destabilization which climate change will bring. Yes, people, support Double Down News. Join the Patreon if you want to see more videos like this. If you want
MashaAllah, these people were saying the truth. I totally agree with them. And they will not show this on the mainstream media, unfortunately, but that's why we should show it, you know, so that people understand. And this is Yvonne Ridley, you know. She was once a captive of the Taliban, and then she converted or reverted to Islam, subhanallah. Let's listen a little bit to what she has to say.
And to say that the British people are not represented by President Bush, for sure, and definitely not by Prime Minister Blair.
She's from Britain.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Brothers, sisters, friends, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome. It gives me tremendous pleasure to be in New Zealand and to share my story with so many of you tonight. Now I can see a lot of non-Muslims in the room. Just relax. I'm not Islam's answer to Billy Graham. I want to share the story with you so you can enjoy it, maybe understand a little bit more about Islam. The title of the story is From Kabul to Kaaba, but I want to take you back a few weeks before I entered Kabul. I want to take you back to September 11. I bet everyone in this room can remember exactly where they were, who they were with, what they were doing when they heard about September 11. The Muslims that I have spoken to who saw the horrific events unfold on television told me that at the moment of the second plane going into the Twin Towers and realizing it was a terrorist strike.
Back to school met tot 30% korting op heel veel elektronica bij Mediamarkt.
Their first reaction was, please God, don't let this be the work of Muslims. I was in my newsroom in Fleet Street in London when I noticed people gathering around the television sets that were there. And I shouted over to somebody at the Sunday Express and said, what's going on? And they said, oh, there's been a terrible accident. There's a plane crashed into one of the Twin Towers in New York. And there's something compelling, isn't there, about live news breaking and live pictures. And I went up and joined everybody else and watched the drama unfold. And then we saw the second plane going in. I've told you about the immediate reaction of Muslims. My immediate reaction was, this is a big, big story. It's bigger than the assassination of JFK, could even be bigger than man landing on the moon. I've got to get out to New York. My reaction was different to those of the Muslims, certainly. By the time I got to Heathrow Airport, the Twin Towers had imploded. The Pentagon had been hit, a plane had gone down in Pennsylvania. America was at war, it was under siege. Her airspace had been closed down, her borders had been sealed, and I physically couldn't get into the country, no matter which airline or which route I looked at, it was impossible. And so I hung round Heathrow in and out for the next 4 days. Finally, I got that ticket for the first flight out to New York. And as I was making my way to the departure lounge, my phone went and it was my boss, the news editor. He said, there's been a change of plans. We want you to go to Pakistan. I was furious. The contacts that I had been making were in New York. My clothes that I had packed were for New York. I'd never been to Pakistan. I probably needed injections. You know, what is this country? Why do you want to send me there? This is a Middle Eastern thing. Why don't I go to the Middle East? And he said, no, the story is going to unfold in Pakistan and neighboring Afghanistan. Within 12 hours, I arrived in Islamabad, dressed for New York, which went down very well, as you can imagine. And over the next few days, I started writing about people's hopes and fears for the impending war, which was going to happen in neighboring Afghanistan, where the richest country in the world was going to bomb the poorest country in the world. By the end of the week, 3,000 journalists from around the world had joined me. They were in Peshawar, they were in Islamabad, and they were down in Quetta. Thousands of journalists from all over the world, from print, radio, TV, the internet, every form of communication you can imagine. I worked for a Sunday newspaper. I was the chief reporter of the Sunday Express, and I was trying to second guess what the news would be at the weekend. You get a chance to be more analytical. And I'm not a journalist who has ever been spoon-fed from governments. I don't trust them. And so I began to think that the best story was probably in Afghanistan. From the ordinary people, the ordinary Afghan people, I wanted to know what their expectations and fears were, what life was like for them living under the Taliban. We'd read a lot of news. According to Bush and Blair, the Taliban was the most evil, brutal regime in the world. They subjugated and oppressed women. They killed them randomly. The tales that were coming out were terrible. I distinctly remember Tony Blair saying, these people are so evil, they won't even let their children fly kites. And so I decided, well, I need to find this out for myself. And I went to the Taliban embassy in Islamabad, and I tried 3 times to get a visa, and 3 times I was rejected. And so in the end, with my guides, I had got 2 or 3 guides who were helping me, I decided to sneak into Afghanistan. The idea was planted in my head by the BBC's chief correspondent, John Simpson, who had put on a burqa and put his toe into Afghanistan and said, hey, look, I've become invisible. And I thought, well, if the BBC's gargantuan correspondent can become invisible, then surely it will be easy for me. And so we devised a plan that we would be part of a wedding party. I would go in with 2 guides, one from the NWFP province in Pakistan, the other one was born in Afghanistan. And we went in as a group. I put on the burqa, we drove through the Khyber Pass. That was another eye-opening experience. I imagined the Khyber Pass to be about 30 yards long. It was 33 miles long, winding, dramatic, mountainous roads, amazing scenery,
I've been there.
Traces of British imperialism everywhere. And then we went right down into a dust bowl known as Torkham, and there was no man's land. We got out of the car and started to walk towards the Taliban checkpoint, where some very scary-looking men with great big beards and big black turbans and Kalashnikovs were sitting, waiting. Suddenly I could hear my heart thump, thump, thump in my ears, and I'm beginning to think maybe this isn't such a good idea. I wanted to turn round and run away, but I'd gone beyond the point of no return. But it was as predicted. I had become invisible. I didn't even warrant a first look, never mind a second look, as we crossed the Taliban checkpoint. I think I was a cross on someone's ID papers. And we went across, we jumped into a taxi, and we headed for the first major city, which was Jalalabad. I was very tense, very excited. I was going to see firsthand.
Okay, I haven't listened to the whole lecture yet. You can do it in your own time. This was the Shabir Show for today. Till the next time, I hope you liked it. Subscribe, like, share, and comment. Bye. See you next time. Wassalam.
It is the Shabir Show at Shabir Burhani.